There are no coincidences in moments like this. If these were to found you, it's because something inside you has already begun to awaken. You felt it. The subtle shift in how you see, sense, and respond to the world. What used to drain you no longer reaches you. What once confused you now reveals itself clearly. That's not arrogance. That's evolution. You're not just surviving experiences anymore. You're decoding them. You're beginning to understand that your awareness itself is power. This message isn't just for anyone scrolling by. It's for the soul who's been misunderstood for feeling too deeply, seeing too clearly, and refusing to play small in a world built on illusion. You spent lifetimes learning that silence could be louder than shouting, that calm could be stronger than control, and that peace, real peace, isn't passive. It's presence. So as you listen, remember, you are not behind, you are not broken, and you are not late. You're awakening exactly on schedule. Everything you've endured has trained your spirit to recognize truth the moment it appears. And this moment right here is one of those divine confirmations. You didn't come here by accident. You were called. Those who rely on confusion to hold power collapse when they meet someone rooted in clarity. The manipulator expects chaos to be their weapon, but against consciousness, chaos becomes confession. They try to provoke emotion, to distort perception, yet find themselves unraveling under the weight of their own motives. What they interpret as silence is actually mastery. It's the kind of stillness that doesn't absorb deception, it exposes it. When the conscious one doesn't bite the bait, the player's strategy turns inward. The noise they try to project begins echoing back at them. Every attempt to control becomes a reminder of the emptiness driving it. They enter thinking they're the puppeteer and leave realizing they've been dancing to their own unresolved pain. It's unsettling for someone addicted to validation to meet a person who draws power from solitude. The manipulator's downfall begins when they realize there's nothing to manipulate. Their tricks require dependency, and the awakened soul has none. Every move they make only reveals their own fractures. They want to dissect your mind, but ended up dissecting their own illusions. The game dissolves not in defeat, but in exposure. Because awareness doesn't retaliate, it reflects. And reflection is the one thing deception can't survive. If this message hit your soul, don't just scroll. Hit subscribe and stay with the light. By the end, they're no longer playing, they're processing. What was supposed to be conquest becomes confession. They came to outthink you, but ended up confronting themselves. You didn't need to destroy them. You simply stayed authentic long enough for truth to do the work. And that's the paradox. What they mistook for your vulnerability was actually their initiation into self-awareness. They came as manipulators and left as witnesses of their own healing. They wanted to shake your foundation, but your stability dismantled their illusion. That's what true authority looks like. The kind that doesn't shout to prove itself. Their tactics were born from wounds they never healed, while your strength came from peace they never understood. What they called strategy was actually fear dressed as intellect. Every manipulation they attempted was a bandage over their own insecurity, an effort to avoid feeling powerless again. But when they crossed paths with someone whole, their methods became obsolete. You didn't meet them with chaos. You met them with clarity. And that clarity was louder than any argument. They had spent their lives mistaking control for intelligence, rehearsing every move to avoid being hurt. But you weren't playing the same game. You had already outgrown the need to prove, persuade, or dominate. They wanted a reaction, yet you offered stillness. They looked for competition, and you gave them comprehension. They wanted to see you fall into the same loop that trapped them, but you refused to enter their storm. Your calmness became their disorientation. Your quiet presence turned their control into confusion. They came expecting a battle, and found reflection instead. Their entire strategy depended on your instability, but they didn't realize you had already healed from what they were still performing. You didn't match their manipulation. You neutralized it by seeing the wound behind it. While they tried to provoke your pain, you were silently reading their story. You saw the child behind the mask, the fear behind the arrogance, the exhaustion behind the performance. That awareness disarmed everything. You didn't try to break them. You allowed truth to reveal itself. And that's where the transformation began. You didn't respond with resistance. You responded with understanding. You didn't expose them through argument, but through energy. The moment they realized they could manipulate peace, they began to question their own chaos. It wasn't your words that reached them, it was your presence. They started to feel what control could never give them: recognition. Not the kind that feeds ego, but the kind that awakens the soul. If you believe in this mission, drop a $20 donation to keep this truth alive and free. By staying grounded, you turn the confrontation into revelation. You became the unseen teacher in a class they never knew they were attending. Their illusion of control began to crumble under the gravity of your awareness. They came seeking power, but encountered consciousness. And in that meeting, they discovered something terrifyingly liberating: that domination is no match for depth. You didn't defeat them. You dismantled the need for the game itself. They entered thinking they could dismantle your peace, but your very stillness dissolved their illusions. That's the mark of one who has mastered energy rather than emotion. Their entire approach was born from unrest, old wounds disguised as intellect, control used as a shield against vulnerability. They believed that dominance could replace healing, that manipulation was a form of power, but you didn't engage their chaos. You transmuted it. While they operated from pain, you functioned from presence. You didn't resist them. You redefined the atmosphere they brought with them. Every attempt to twist perception turned into a revelation of their own intentions. Your composure became the reflection they couldn't escape. They threw confusion and projection like smoke, yet your awareness turned it transparent. You didn't need to argue. Truth spoke through vibration, not words. Their deceit crumbled the moment it met consciousness that couldn't be provoked. You weren't there to defeat them. You were there to dissolve the illusion they lived in. Their manipulation couldn't survive your clarity because you refused to absorb it. You transformed it. Each tactic they used revealed its origin: fear pretending to be confidence, control masquerading as love, intellect hiding insecurity. You didn't meet it with confrontation. You met it with comprehension. You understood that what people project outward is simply the reflection of their unhealed parts. So, instead of retaliating, you became the quiet field where deception loses its echo. They expected chaos, but your calm became alchemy. You didn't play their game. You changed the environment it needed to exist. Every time they reached for power, they lost it to the light you carried. They thought they were pulling you into confusion, but you were rewriting the frequency beneath it. What they felt as defeat was really exposure. The vibration of truth disrupted the script they were trying to perform. They left the encounter lighter, though they couldn't explain why. They didn't realize you had purified the entire exchange. You turned hostility into harmony, deceit into discernment. That's not defense, it's transformation. You didn't overpower them. You overrode the entire program that created the need for power in the first place. Your energy became the silent reset that forced every hidden motive to either evolve or disappear. They came expecting to manipulate energy, but your vibration rewrote the environment entirely. You didn't resist them. You recalibrated the atmosphere they brought. Their methods were built on control and tension, but you moved from precision and alignment. They were trying to provoke a reaction, and instead found themselves absorbed into silence too pure to feed on. That's not defense. That's frequency mastery. When someone operates from wholeness, corruption can't coexist. You didn't argue their darkness into submission. You simply held such clarity that falsehoods couldn't hold their shape. What they felt as confusion was actually purification, your presence unraveling every deception they depended on. They entered thinking you were predictable, something they could study and bend, but they hadn't prepared for someone who functioned like a mirror reflecting energy, not ego. You weren't reacting to behavior. You were interpreting vibration. Their mind was calculating. Your awareness was correcting the entire signal beneath it. Each manipulative word dissolved before it landed because truth in you left no resonance for distortion. They wanted a contest of intellect. But you were never competing. You were harmonizing the field. That's why their tactics fell apart. They tried to inject chaos. But peace became the filter through which every action was revealed for what it was. You didn't just recognize manipulation. You transformed it into understanding. Their strategies crumbled under the light of your consistency. You didn't need to confront them directly. Dishonesty disintegrated simply by being near you. You didn't fight back. You made false energy collapse under its own imbalance. They wanted to humble you, but your calm dismantled their performance. Every attempt to provoke only reflected their own unrest. You didn't respond with anger. You responded with awareness that couldn't be shaken. While they depended on ego to feel powerful, you were operating from the security of truth. You weren't trying to appear strong. You were unbothered because nothing needed proving. That's what made their confidence evaporate mid-sentence. The illusion of dominance dies quickly in the presence of inner stillness. If this spoke to your spirit, subscribe and stand with those who see beyond the illusion. You became the quiet gravity that stripped away every mask. Your restraint confused them because they were used to chaos being the measure of control. They couldn't grasp how someone could hold that much strength without aggression, or how silence could reveal more than shouting ever could. You didn't destroy their darkness. You let it implode under exposure. In the end, they walked away smaller. Not because you crushed them, but because they finally saw how much of their identity was built on pretending to be large. You didn't win through resistance. You restored balance through truth. Every exchange became a lesson. They didn't realize they were attending. You weren't fighting their behavior. You were healing the vibration beneath it. And that is the highest form of mastery. Turning conflict into coherence, manipulation into awareness, and darkness into reflection, without ever raising your voice. They tried to pull you into confusion, but your awareness left them nowhere to attach. Every attempt to manipulate dissolved before it could take hold, because your clarity created no foothold for distortion. You didn't fight with suspicion. You move with presence. When a person is anchored in truth, deception can't find an entry point. They couldn't grasp how you perceive their intent without proof, how you sense a distortion beneath their performance. While they were crafting stories, you were perceiving the undercurrent. They were playing tactics on the surface. You were reading the rhythm beneath it. By the time they realized the rules had changed, they had already revealed themselves. You didn't need to argue or expose anyone. Awareness did it for you. They arrived prepared for battle, expecting resistance, but met reflection instead. What they thought would trigger. You only brought their own motives into focus. You let your authenticity speak in silence, and it did what confrontation never could. It made them hear themselves. The more they tried to provoke, the more their own contradictions echoed back at them. They came expecting to dominate, but your presence turned their aggression into self-observation. That's what happens when someone grounded in peace meets someone powered by illusion. Your calm dismantled their theater. You didn't raise your voice, you raised a frequency. Every attempt to provoke emotion only led them deeper into the emotions they've been avoiding. Fear, guilt, insecurity, shame. You didn't punish, you illuminated. You didn't retaliate, you revealed. True strength is not found in reaction, but in restraint. It's the ability to remain centered while chaos tests your balance. Your silence wasn't avoidance. It was higher authority. It said without words, you can't shake what was never unstable. That kind of composure unsettles those who depend on control. They expected defense and met stillness. They thought patience was weakness and learned it was power. Every unspoken truth in your energy became a mirror they couldn't escape. You didn't destroy their ego. You made it undeniable. Once someone sees themselves in truth, the illusion loses its power forever. Their strategy ran on ego, but your responses came from spirit. Where their motives sought hierarchy, yours sought harmony. They wanted to win. You wanted to understand. That's what dismantled everything. Ego competes. Spirit clarifies. Your empathy didn't make you vulnerable. It made you invincible. You could see the wound beneath the performance, the fear beneath the pride, the hunger beneath the control. You weren't playing to overpower them. You were redirecting energy back toward awareness. Every attempt to corner you became a lesson they couldn't escape. They mistook your calm for surrender, but it was divine calibration. You didn't force balance, you embodied it. And when truth is embodied, deception has nowhere left to hide. They thought they could manipulate the rhythm of your emotions, but your stillness changed the tempo of the entire encounter. Each move they made began to unravel under the weight of your calm awareness. They expected you to react, but your silence forced them to meet themselves. It wasn't domination that shifted the power, it was vibration. Fear fuels ego, but alignment dissolves it. Without realizing it, they were being recalibrated by your presence. You didn't overpower them. You simply held such clarity that their confusion lost direction. That's when control became impossible and revelation began. They learned that cleverness without compassion turns intelligence into manipulation, and control without humility always collapses in on itself. You became a mirror instead of an enemy. They prepared for resistance, but met understanding. They wanted a war, you offered insight, and that disarmed them more than any argument ever could. You saw their attempt not as attacks, but as signals of pain. Instead of responding to their tactics, you looked deeper, to the wound that made them seek control in the first place. That's where the dynamic dissolved. You stopped trying to convince and started to comprehend. Your empathy didn't weaken you. It refined your discernment. You saw the frightened self behind performer, the soul that never learned a connection without control. Most would have taken offense. You took perspective. You realized they weren't fighting you at all. They were fighting the reflection you represented. And rather than punishing them, you became the atmosphere where truth could breathe. That's what breaks manipulation, not force, but awareness. Your refusal to dehumanize them exposed the humanity they were hiding from. They didn't lose because you attacked. They lost because you saw them clearly and loved them enough to stay conscious. That's what healed the moment. The power of empathy stripped their control of its fuel. When a person is seen in truth, masks start to suffocate. That's why they stumbled. Not because you confronted them, but because the game stopped working. You didn't correct them with anger. You corrected the frequency between you. You turned defensiveness into reflection, projection into recognition. Your steadiness became their teacher. And when they tried to cloak hostility in charm, your authenticity made the disguise unbearable. They came armed with bitterness, expecting to drag you into the same vibration, but you turned every attack into awareness. You didn't echo their poison. You refined it. Your grace became the unexpected medicine they didn't know they needed. You didn't compete. You transmuted. Every attempt to wound you only exposed their inner fractures. Without shouting, you spoke louder than pride ever could. Grace became your language of correction. Not through humiliation, but illumination. It showed them what guilt feels like when it meets gentleness. They wanted to see you collapse under the weight of offense, but you stood in quiet mastery. You proved that true power doesn't destroy to win. It restores without needing credit. They couldn't grasp how someone could hold such mercy without forgetting the wound. You didn't forgive because you were blind to the harm. They misread your grace as weakness. You forgave because you refused to let venom shape your vibration. Their betrayal was a test of your evolution, and instead of mirroring their chaos, you purified it into wisdom. You didn't ascend to meet their behavior. You elevated the entire interaction. That's what dissolved their illusion of control. They expected revenge and met renewal. The very energy they used to harm became the current that refined you. What they mistook for softness was sacred intelligence. You didn't simply turn away from conflict. You turned it into revelation. Through compassion, you transform hostility into higher order. Your $20 gift helps keep the truth shining where darkness tried to hide it. You move beyond the realm where ego plays its games. They were throwing words like stones, while you were translating the impact into understanding. Each moment of restraint restructured the energy between you. You didn't suppress emotion. You transmuted it into harmony. The lesson wasn't about who won, but who could stay aligned. They came to test your humanity, but left learning what divinity feels like. They realized too late that your kindness was a discipline forged in consciousness, not a lack of awareness. You didn't fight them to defeat them. You stood in light so steady it forced their shadow to see itself. Their manipulations collapsed, not because you countered them, but because you functioned from another frequency entirely. While they were tangled in mental games, you were rebalancing the current beneath them. They moved in calculation. You moved in coherence. You weren't debating facts. You were stabilizing energy. Every pause, every measured breath, every silence you held became its own correction code. They mistook your stillness for uncertainty. unaware you were adjusting the entire field they disturbed. You didn't need to argue to shift the outcome. Your very presence did it. They left changed, though they couldn't explain why. The tension they carried dissolved without confrontation. What they thought was control had simply run out of resonance. You weren't resisting them. You were reprogramming the atmosphere around them. That's why they walked away lighter, even if they never said thank you. You didn't rewrite their mind. You recalibrated their spirit. You became the tuning fork that restored balance where manipulation once thrived. They came with weapons of intellect and ego, expecting dominance, but your awareness disarmed them before battle even began. You didn't win through argument. You transformed the vibration itself. They tried to provoke, and you offered presence. They tried to distort, and you radiated truth. You became proof that clarity dismantles deception without force. What they intended as destruction became their awakening. Your peace made their control feel foreign, their tactics meaningless. You didn't conquer them. You conducted the entire interaction on a higher octave. They didn't lose to you. They lost to their own reflection illuminated by your light. They walked into your life thinking they were about to outthink you, not realizing they were stepping into a frequency they didn't even understand. What began as a performance of control slowly turned into their confrontation with truth. You didn't come to compete or outwit. You came to awaken. You weren't interested in dominance. You were demonstrating alignment. And somewhere in the middle of their manipulation, they began to see it too. Something in their mask cracked under the weight of your peace. They started realizing that real strength doesn't need the force. It simply exists. You didn't challenge their power. You redefined it. What they mistook for surrender was actually divine equilibrium. You weren't their opponent. You became their awakening, and that moment marked the beginning of their transformation. They entered armed with ego, but left carrying understanding. They expected a battlefield, yet found themselves inside a classroom of consciousness. Every scheme they rehearsed dissolved in the presence of your awareness. While they were looking for an argument, you offered reflection. Your calm became the surface where their actions revealed their own truth. You didn't defeat them in the way they imagined. You elevated them beyond the illusion of winning. They realized too late that control is a fragile substitute for connection, and arrogance is only fear in disguise. You didn't humiliate them. You showed them the futility of manipulation. In your stillness, they saw the difference between cleverness and wisdom. Your presence rewrote the energy around them. Every calculated move lost its meaning because you weren't participating in the script. You didn't fight to prove anything. You allowed your awareness to speak louder than defense ever could. The one who entered to dominate left humbled by the reflection you offered. You didn't respond through retaliation. You responded through vibration. You didn't punish. You illuminated. That's why, even in their silence, they carried the lesson long after the moment ended. They met something they couldn't argue with. Truth delivered without resistance. They came seeking victory but left tasting peace. Not the fragile calm of avoidance, but the deep serenity of alignment. It disarmed them more than any confrontation could. They had relied on reaction to measure control, but you gave them none. Instead, you gave them space to see their own distortion unravel. What you offered wasn't surrender. It was clarity. It made them realize how exhausting pretense really is. You didn't outsmart them. You allowed their own energy to teach them what they've been running from. What this truly revealed is that power isn't measured in domination or applause. It's found in awareness. You didn't just withstand manipulation. You turned it into revelation. You made their tactics obsolete simply by refusing to descend into them. Each attempt to diminish you became an invitation for you to elevate the energy. You weren't just protecting your peace. You were teaching by example. Every boundary you held became a sermon, without words. Every moment of restraint became instruction in presence. They left that encounter changed, though they might never admit it. You didn't just silence their chaos. You tuned it. You showed that victory is not about defeating another, but about staying aligned when others lose their balance. You transformed conflict into clarity, resistance into reflection, and arrogance into awareness. You prove that true mastery is not in overpowering anyone. It's in awakening them without losing your own light.